me tell you how my week has gone, alright? My week has gone very, very well. What happened was, the International Booker happened, and I put money on Kairos winning because, of course, Kairos was going to win, and I put money on it at the lowest odds, like it had the lowest odds out of all the books, so I got like 85 bucks or something. And I said if I won, I would use that money to buy a first edition signed hardback of the Australian publisher's version of Alexis Wright's novel Praiseworthy, and that is what I did. Don't ask me how much it cost. Now, Alexis Wright is an Indigenous Australian author, and she is someone that has been on my radar for a while, and a lot of Australian people who are interested in literature are well aware of her. She's a very respected and revered individual. I myself have read some of her novel Carpentaria, which won her the Miles Franklin a while back, and I DNF'd that book, and I've also read sections of her other book, Tracker, which is a sort of collective biography, I think is her term for it, and I have only read sections of that, and I wasn't particularly compelled by that book either. But she is, as I mentioned, an author who is very well-liked here in Australia, and she has amassed a real sort of audience for herself. While I did not feel that Carpentaria or Tracker were necessarily super compelling to me, this book is different because nothing I could say to criticize it matters. This book does not obey any of the laws of fiction or criticism. This book is goofy, it is batshit. When it's serious, it's still baked into this bizarre magical style, and I prefer it to Carpentaria and Tracker and her other work in almost every single way, and it is being called her magnum opus for a reason. Praiseworthy also seems to be the novel that's her breakout on an international stage. She's already won the Stella Prize, which is an Australian award, and she's won the James Tait Black, which is fucking insane. She's also longlisted for the Miles Franklin, and people are also pushing her to be longlisted for the Booker as well, although that will not happen. One of the main reasons I'm interested in reviewing this book is because there is a sort of feeling I'm getting, a certain standard that she might hit for being considered by the Nobel Academy. I think that there have been other authors in Australia who have been touted as such, like, I don't know, David Malouf or Gerald Murnane or people like that. And I've never really felt like they clear the bar in a way that makes sense to me. The only reason I've ever said Gerald Murnane is because other people were saying it. I personally don't feel that after reading a lot of his fiction. With Alexis Wright, I kind of do. I think that this is someone that the Academy could turn their sort of dark eye of Sauron onto, because she kind of fits. She's very well respected. Her books are quite complex, and this particular book, being treated as her magnum opus, would be a good reason to award the Nobel to her at this point in time. She's kind of established herself as someone that the Academy might be looking at if they wanted to award a unique type of voice in Australian literature. But now let's talk about the book itself, Praiseworthy. Praiseworthy is a book about a town called Praiseworthy in the far north of Australia. It's Queensland or the Northern Territory, somewhere like that. And the town is kind of surrounded by a giant smog cloud, and inside the town are these really bizarre characters, all of whom are Indigenous. So we have a man called Widespread, or Causeman Steel. He has a couple of names, and he is hyperfixated on collecting all of the donkeys in Australia and forming them into a new transport network. His wife is obsessed with butterflies. One of his sons is obsessed with pedophiles, and his other son, whose name is Aboriginal Sovereignty, does something to himself that I won't spoil, and then he becomes something else, I'll say. This book introduces you to a completely new way of seeing the world, that being through Indigenous people who have more or less been driven mad. And I can only see faint traces of the country I know through, like, some of her locational storytelling, or perhaps some sense of spirit or some small detail where I can recognize Australian writing in what she's doing. But honestly, she feels so far removed from any of these other authors who are big in Australia at the moment. She is totally her own thing. But I feel as kind of awestruck and alienated by this book as anybody would from a different country who's not familiar with Indigenous Australians and their place in today's society in Australia. I'm not saying I'm as familiar with it as someone like Alexis Wright is, of course, but I'm at least aware of that as a circumstance that is different to my own. From what I've read of Alexis Wright's writing, she strikes me as a satirist first and foremost, and she has done a lot with federal government satire in other books that I've read. I hear The Swan Book, which is another novel of hers, is like the extreme example of that. But in this book, one of the characters is obsessed with pedophiles and also Canberra politicians, as you do. And he is obsessed with a government lady coming and saving him and him becoming a white man who can then become part of Canberra and part of the government down there. It's very weird. It's a very weird sense of satire. But yes, there is shit in here that is incredibly satirical and speaks to me. In this book, I love the constant references to Canberra being like, wow, it must be so important over there. They must be so powerful over in Canberra. Wow. And I just love the idea of an international market getting hands on a book that mentions Qantas and ASIO and Hoyts and all of this shit that I'm aware of. It's just so wonderful. But beyond the satire of kind of trivial sort of Australian culture, there's a lot of mention of Aboriginal plight and ground level effects of government laws and the effect of the government and white people and colonization on Aboriginal people today. And there's a lot of mention of things that I'm aware of as being an issue, but I don't often see a description of or a visualization of, like the Northern Territory intervention, which I believe Alexis Wright has spoken on before, and this book could kind of be read as an example of that kind of government bill or that kind of government intervention on people living just in a town, like the ground level view of something like that. And it's very interesting. It's really interesting to read. The story, generally speaking, is of people rebelling against government intervention and against white mindsets and trying to cleanse themselves of it. That's what I'd say the book is about. And it's kind of about the madness that exists on that sort of outer rim where people are trying to fight back and reclaim their identities, but they're kind of losing sense of what that is. After colonization stole so much of the Aboriginal people, the last thing that's left to be stolen from them is their minds and their viewpoints and their ways of looking at the world. And it's a really brutal image that we've got of this madness at the very sort of edge of assimilation. Like, it's the last thing left. And it's really sad, and I respect Alexis Wright's dedication to making the book unwieldy and intense and scattershot and jumping around and constantly shifting focus, because it's tapping into a type of storytelling that is natural for her, and it's kind of her way as an author of rebelling against this assimilation that I'm referring to, of characters wanting to become white and wanting to adjust to white life, and sometimes not wanting to do that and sometimes wanting to do that. And it's kind of like, as I said, the madness at the edge that this author is trying to tap into by expressing this book in a way that no white author would ever do. It's extremely maximalist, this book. This is not a subtle book. No, not at all. But I never really felt like it had to be. The various character voices and the crazy writing style and the really aggressive political commentary that made me roll my eyes a little bit, by the end kind of boils down into a quiet sense of wisdom that I wasn't expecting, and I really loved what I was left with in this book and the unwieldy, overbearing, crazy steps that we had to take to get there. You could tell the story of this book in 200 pages, but it's something about this book's commitment and its disregard for the reader's sort of need for narrative or understanding of what's going on, and its willingness to be abstract on a really large scale, that became really respectable, even if it was frustrating. There was a point like 70% of the way through the book where I went, what the fuck is going on? Like, what is happening? It's hard to tell if everything in the book is happening at once, or if certain characters are dead or alive, but the book is kind of lapping around on itself, and it follows these really interesting currents of what feels like speech. It has that feeling of the rhythm and eloquence of speech, just really investing and complex spoken word. That's what this book feels like when you're reading it. And Alexis Wright also interjects on her own narrative like it's an oral thing. Every now and again, when she gets sidetracked, she'll go, well, anyway, back to this, and she'll put exclamation marks and she'll jump back into what she was saying in a way that feels like somebody sitting around a campfire and telling you a story. A really, really fucking long story. And it combined all of this finely structured sentence writing with this interjection and this really freewheeling who gives a fuck attitude. When words are repeated, because repetition is important in this book, when words are repeated, they mean different things to different people in certain situations. Some characters use a word more flippantly than others, like words like omnicide or integration and things. They mean different things to different people, and it's part of that nature of telling the story in the way that she is, that words get repeated and they get manipulated and changed in the way that they do. I think my issue with the book is in the first half, the book reaches moments of plateau that go on for too long. Once a certain character is set up and their headspace is established, the book spends too long just sitting in it and not moving on, and I wouldn't necessarily see that as a criticism. I would see that as just what the author was doing. If the second half of the book didn't change a lot and didn't start speeding ahead with doing different things, there are certain senses of status quo where it will sit in a character's spot, like the main character, Cause Man Steel, him and his donkeys. We know what he wants to do with these donkeys, and the book does not stop reiterating that in the first half, and I did not need all of that. It came to a point where I was like, I've adjusted to the book too quickly. I've adjusted to what you're doing too quickly, and I needed to move on and do something else. We know what this main character wants to do. He wants to find the fucking special donkey. And this sense of inertia did not help the book, given that the book was willing to be crazy and do crazy shit later on. Does that make sense? I do like the repetition on occasion in certain specific examples. There's one moment where Tommyhawk is watching his brother do something in the first third of the book. I won't spoil it. In that scene, every beginning of a chapter within that section of the book begins with a discussion of like whale carcasses and whale bones, and then it will eventually bleed back into the main scene that we're watching. And it was a really weird feeling, but it really helped, and it felt like a story that kept being picked up again. Like, at a new point, the author will start talking about it again, and they'll go, where was I? Oh, we were at the whale bones, da 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 da. Oh, and we were at this section here. It feels like the author is reminding themselves of where they are, and it's really cool. It's a really cool feeling. It's this extreme, as I said, maximalist sense of style that the author is going for, where every description is like a paragraph. What will happen is a scene will be set and kind of wallowed in, and you'll be made to sit there and read these really long descriptions, and the scene will become kind of like an overripe fruit, where everything is fleshed out and really detailed, but it's still the same scene, and it's still the same character's headspace, and I love that, but it does become really, it's really weird. It's really weird and jarring to have a scene that goes on for 150 pages where it covers about 15 seconds worth of moment in someone's life. About 15 seconds can take up 150 pages in this book, because it's constantly bleeding back into itself and reiterating itself and jumping around itself. It's really, really weird. But as I said, the second half of this book becomes sadder and more melancholic, and I really appreciate the shift in tone that we get in this book, past about, I don't know, like I'd say about the 50% mark. There's a section in this book called Cargo Shifter that was my favorite part of the book, and at the beginning of that there's a scene where we see one of the characters being beaten by the police, and that scene inspires him to do something later that I won't spoil. But that scene, in theory, has already happened in the book, given the flow of the book. Like, that scene gives the character a reason to do something, but the character's already done it in the flow of the book. So it's clear that that has to be a flashback, but it's not really treated as a flashback. It's really strange. You also don't feel like the author is going to give you that particular piece of information, and then when she does, it's quite surprising. Again, it's hard not to spoil, but this particular section, Cargo Shifter, was beautiful and melancholic and really sad, and began to drive home the themes of the book where it needed to happen. Before that point, the book was batty, and it was jumpy, and it was frenetic and scattershot, and it was funny. And then at that point in the book and on, it became sadder and wiser, I felt like, which I really appreciated. Something happens to this Aboriginal Sovereignty character that becomes really bizarre and magical, and involves the sea. And in that chapter, Cargo Shifter and onwards, you begin to treat this character as someone who isn't quite human, and it's really powerful. And then by the end of the book, I'm left with a lot to think about. The ending of this book is fantastic, and really, like, chapters in the back half of this book will be the things that I come back to read. The whole book is a trip, and it's really hard to criticize or reduce any part of this book because it's so unique, but I will say that the second half of the book was something I enjoyed more than the first half, and the second half of the book had real staying power to it, and I really remember a lot of that back half, and it's remained in my head for a couple of days after I finished this. I wouldn't say the book is magical realism. That's not really what I'd say, because it feels like all of the magic in this book and the kind of odd stuff in this book is kind of in characters' heads. It feels like if you were to put a different type of character in this environment, they would not be seeing the same things that these characters do. I think that's an important distinction to make. I really only highlighted the one quote in this book, which was, "Living with this abomination in the sky made perfect sense to the people of Praiseworthy. Why not?" And I thought that that was an important quote to sit with. That's like a key point of this book to me, is understanding that these people live and think in different ways. It's kind of, this book is this 700-800 page exercise in empathy and joining a unique environment and trying to understand the way these unique people think and why they're angry and what they're angry at and how Australia has fucked these people over in ways that they don't even necessarily realise. So yes, it is an angry book, and it's a politically charged book, and it's a very satirical book, but it's not a book that I felt was asking for pity. That's never the vibe that I got from this. I do recommend the book, but with some caveats. You do have to put a lot of time into reading this, and you're not always rewarded for that time, especially in the first half. But by the end, the book really pays off, and it becomes really moving and really sad and really unique. I've never read a book like this before, and I very much doubt anybody watching this video has either. What Alexis Wright has done here is very odd, and it's amazing to see it succeed on an international level and get longlisted for these prizes like the Dublin Literary Award and the James Tait Black and shit like that. It's awesome to see, and I hope that this book continues to generate that steam, because the people who read this book will read something unique and odd and abstract and epic in scale and scope, and it's something that I would definitely recommend, but it's not something that everyone's going to enjoy. No way. As for me, I'd say I'd give the book an 8 out of 10. If I'm going to reread this book, I would probably be rereading sections of this book in the second half, to kind of get myself back in that unique headspace and to experience some of that legitimate emotion I got in the back half of this book as well. Thank you all so much for watching. Please leave a like on this video, and make sure to watch Bob the Booker's review of this book if you haven't already, because he, as always, gives a very intelligent take. And yeah, I really love this book, and if you're interested in it, please feel free to pick up a copy. I don't know how hard it is to find in bookstores in places other than Australia, but if this sounds interesting to you, please read it, and you will read something unique. I can at least tell you that. Thank you so much for watching again, and bye!